When I talk about the project of predicting the future, I'm concerned with the project of predicting it scientifically. I'm going to say some rather rude things tonight about that project, and anyone who has a special interest in the reputation of the prophet Isaiah or Cassandra need not worry. They remain untouched by my strictures, as does anybody's great aunt who predicts the future from looking at the tea leaves at the bottom of the cup or some such procedure. I am concerned not with the claims of Isaiah or Cassandra, but with the sort of claims made by Herbert Spencer and Auguste Comte, or more recently and dangerously by Daniel Bell and Herman Kahn. It is now, of course, well over 200 years since the project of predicting the future became a major project in our culture. Behind it there lies the aspiration to reveal social life as governed by laws in the same sense that the natural world is governed by laws. There lies the aspiration to reveal the social sciences as fundamentally like the natural sciences in their form, so that, given a set of law-like generalizations of an appropriate kind, and given the knowledge of the states of a society for a given time, one may predict and retrodict the past and the future, showing the whole thing as a prefabricated order. That is to say, given the accomplishment of this project, the prediction of revolutions and wars will be the same kind of task as the prediction of storms and eclipses. And failure to predict will rest, as the failure to predict storms, eclipses, and earthquakes rests, solely on our ignorance of the relevant subject matter or our failure to have formulated the various laws. What I want to ask this evening is whether there is good reason to believe that this project could ever be accomplished. Now, of course, this isn't solely a theoretical question, it is a practical question too. In 1970, there was a rash of books with names like towards the year 2000. And I predict that in 1980 there will be a similar rash, and in 1990, publishers being incurable optimists as they are, an even more similar rash. You will notice that I allow myself predictions of a certain scope about such things as the habits of publishers. What I want to point to now, however, is that the whole notion of predicting the future of society for the next 30 or 40 years rests on, quite explicitly, the project of showing social life as law governed. Now, in order to try and show that this whole project is a superstition, which is what I wish to try and show this evening, in order to show this, I first of all wish to make a distinction between what I shall call natural particulars and what I shall call social particulars. By a natural particular, I mean a particular atom, a particular molecule, a particular planetary system, a particular sample of a particular gas. Natural particulars are what provide the natural scientist with what he has to explain. And it is a condition of a natural particular being identified as a natural particular that its behavior should exhibit regularities which allow us to predict its future behavior. Kepler's laws of planetary motion, or the gas laws, laws like Boyle's law or Dalton's law of partial pressures, are laws which state regularities embodied in the behavior of particular samples of particular gases, or embodied in the behavior of our planetary system, such that to identify the planetary system as that planetary system, or a particular sample of a particular gas as that particular gas, is precisely to show that the transitions from state to state are governed by regularity in just this way. It is a condition of being eligible for explanation by the natural sciences. It is a condition of being eligible for explanation by theory that this sort of regularity should be exhibited by natural particulars. Now notice two features of natural particulars which follow from this. The first is that the identity of natural particulars is constituted by their regularity. It is precisely because we are able to identify the laws of planetary motion that we are able to distinguish between those movements of the planets in the planetary system, which are simply the self-development of the planetary system according to its own laws, and those movements of the planetary system, actual or hypothetical, which are or would be the result of the alien intervention of some external force. When, in the early 19th century, observation became accurate enough to determine that the orbit of Mercury was not as it would have been if the number of planets identified were correct and Kepler's laws were correct, two hypotheses were open. The first was that the system was being disturbed from outside. The second, that there was an unidentified planet. There was an unidentified planet, Neptune. Kepler's laws were vindicated. But it is precisely because we have a criterion for the identity of the system given us by Kepler's laws that we are able to distinguish between these two hypotheses. So the identity of a natural particular is a matter of the repetition of regular patterns of a predictable kind. Now, secondly, it follows from this account of natural particulars that we can state what would be a prima facie counterexample to the laws that we have identified. Where it's the case that our predictions on the basis of our formulation of the laws fails, and secondly, we can show that this failure is not due to the intervention of some external force, some strange body, for example, from an alien galaxy coming into reach of our planetary system. Where we can show that neither of these is the case, we know we have a prima facie counterexample to our formulation of the laws. But we would not, in fact, be able to state the notion of a prima facie counterexample were it not for the notion of this kind of predictable regularity embodied in the behavior of a natural particular. Now, if the world of men is a world of natural particulars, then it will follow that the project of predicting human behavior is essentially a right-minded one. What I now want to argue is, first of all, that the relevant particulars with which men are concerned are not natural particulars. And I wish to draw a distinction between what I have called a natural particular and what I shall call a social particular. By a social particular, I mean in the first instance such particulars as a particular institution or organization. I mean a particular university, a particular hospital, a particular school, a particular factory, a particular political party, a particular social class, or a particular practice, the practice of medicine, the practice of a particular religion, whatever it is. Now, there is one crucial difference between social particulars and natural particulars. Natural particulars are, so to speak, external to our beliefs about them. We formulate beliefs about natural particulars, and we then proceed to test our beliefs about natural particulars against the facts. Social particulars, on the other hand, are not merely observed externally. We don't merely formulate beliefs about them. It is a crucial fact that social particulars are constituted, in part, but in essential part, by the beliefs of those who participate in them. Let me give you two examples. What makes a currency system is not just that money circulates in the sense that tokens of paper or metal circulate which have been duly authorized by some authority. Money is only money if this condition is not only met, but another condition is met, namely that a particular currency-using population believe that these tokens of metal or paper have a particular value. And the moment that a particular currency-using population ceases to believe that these particular pieces of paper or metal have a particular value, then these pieces of paper and metal cease to be money. This happened in Germany and Austria in 1923. That is to say, the social institution of money depends on people believing that there is a social institution in which they are participating, which is the exchange of money. As with, let me give you another example, as with currency, so also with an army. To be an officer is not merely to hold a commission from a duly constituted authority. To be an officer is to be recognized as being an officer by one's equals, superiors, and inferiors in the relevant situations. And where the relevant population ceases to recognize one as an officer, one simply ceases to be an officer. To be an officer involves being believed to be an officer by a relevant class of people. When this ceases to be the case, as in the Russian army in 1917, quite simply, there cease to be officers, there indeed ceases to be an army. That is to say, it is the case of social institutions that it is a necessary condition for their coming into being and their continuing to exist that they shall be believed in, and the belief is constitutive of the social institution. Now, what is the significance of the fact that social particulars are in essential part constituted by beliefs about them? In order to ask this question, I have to make one crucial further point. No social particular need ever be constituted by, and most social particulars are not in fact constituted by, one single set of homogeneous, consistent and coherent beliefs. It is of the nature of social particulars that they always are potentially and often are actually constituted by rival sets of beliefs. And indeed, their life is constituted by debate about what they are. It is characteristic of the lives of social particulars, of political parties, social classes, medical institutions, and the like, that debate about what a political party is, what medical practice is, what a church is, whatever it is constitutive of the life of political parties, medical practice, churches, schools, whatever. That is to say, it is not just a simple, single, consistent set of beliefs about what a party is, what a church is, what medical practice is, which constitute these institutions, but a continuous controversy about the meaning of these institutions constitutes these institutions. And it follows from this that a certain kind of controversy, which turns up in history and the social sciences, and which is often treated as being of marginal interest, is in fact centrally significant. I mean such controversies as that as to whether the groupings in the English Parliament of the 1760s are or are not to be called political parties, or the question of whether the rising classes in the 16th century are or are not to be called instances of the bourgeoisie. These questions are not just, as they are often treated, definitional. They are in fact questions that arise naturally because in the life of social particulars, debate as to whether this or that example is a political party, is an instance of the bourgeois class, is an instance of medical practice, are of the essence of belonging to that sort of institution. And it follows that beliefs about social particulars stand in a quite different relationship to so-called prima facie counterexamples. Roughly speaking, there are no prima facie counterexamples of a relevant sort about social particulars. For debate about whether this or that is a counterexample to our beliefs about what a political party is, are in fact just the sort of beliefs that constitute the lives of political parties. And indeed, there is no way here of making this sort of controversy a matter of standing objectively outside the institution and asking for objective truths about it. The question of what is or is not a political party, whether this is or is not a borderline case, how to construe the notion of political party, is what constitutes a party. And it follows that the concept of political party, whether applied by those who live within the life of the party or by the observer, is an essentially contestable concept. By an essentially contestable concept, I mean a concept which always leaves open room for debate as to its proper application. And this is true of the concepts which apply to social particulars in a way that it cannot be true of the concepts that apply to natural particulars. Of course, where the concepts of natural particulars are concerned, there are borderline cases. But a borderline case is a clear borderline case in the case of natural particulars. Whereas, in the case of social particulars, it isn't just that there are borderline cases, it is that the question of what a borderline case is always a debatable question too. Now, you may ask, what has this to do with unpredictability? I want now to pick out 3 types of unpredictability in human affairs, and I want to show that these are essentially connected with the nature of social particulars as I have characterized it so far. The first type of unpredictability is that type of unpredictability which belongs to conceptual innovation or invention, or if you like, to radical conceptual innovation or invention. Now, I wish to produce arguments which will show you that the invention of new concepts cannot be predicted. And I wish to present two major arguments in this respect. The first of them I owe to Sir Karl Popper, which is a weaker version of the argument. The second, rather stronger version and more particular version of the argument is my own. First of all, Popper's argument. Let us imagine that you and I are sitting round in a cave in the New Stone Age on a wet Sunday afternoon, and presently, to pass the time, you say, you know, I think that in about 3 years from now, somebody is going to invent the wheel. I say, the what? You say, the wheel. I say, what's that? You say, well, when it's invented, it will be round, and it will have what we shall call spokes, and you will be able to put two of them together with what we shall call an axle, and you offer me a description of the wheel. And then you say, oh my God, I've invented it. That is to say, you cannot predict the invention of the wheel, because to predict the invention of the wheel, you must specify what a wheel is, and to specify what a wheel is just is to invent it. And this is, I believe, the basic argument against the prediction of conceptual innovation. It holds not, of course, only of scientific concepts, whether tolerably elementary ones like those involved in the wheel, or extremely elaborate ones like those involved in quantum mechanics. It holds also, of course, in art, in theology, in literature. One couldn't predict the invention of tragic drama as a genre. One couldn't predict the doctrine of justification by faith alone, for in a crucial sense, in order to predict, one would have to invent these doctrines, or this particular dramatic form. And that is to say, radical conceptual innovation is unpredictable. Now, I wish to try and show not only why I take Popper's view here to be true, but also to produce a particular application of it, which is, I think, if even a stronger form. Let us suppose that somebody wished to deny the assertions that I have just made. And they wish to suggest that one could predict certain kinds of intellectual innovation of the sort that I believe to be impossible. And let us suppose that as a first step to this, they suggest that it might be quite possible to predict which theorems in a particular branch of mathematics will be proved within the next 5 years, which have not been proved to date. We take some section of mathematics, algebraic topology, let us say, and we shall simply take out of the list of as yet unproved theorems, we shall select a subset, and we shall find a way of predicting, doubtless using some kind of computer program, a way of predicting which theorems out of this set will be proved within the next 5 years. Now, supposing somebody put forward this project, he would be involved in holding that he has a decision procedure which will enable him, out of the set of formulas which belong in the area of algebraic topology, which enables him to tell which formulas are theorems, which formulas have proofs, and that he can do this in advance. He can't say all the formulas that they have proofs, but given that he selects correctly a set for the next 5 years, all these formulas will have proofs. So we will have some modified form of decision procedure. Now, we have a proof, a very strong proof, that for any calculus richer than the first-order predicate calculus, there is no such decision procedure. But if there is no such decision procedure, then no subset of the as yet unproved, unknown theorems, rather, unproved formulas, there is no subset available. It follows that either this is unpredictable, or there is a major flaw in one of the best accepted proofs in modern logic. And anybody who wishes to hold that this is predictable will have to show a flaw in that proof. This puts a very nice technical onus on anyone who wishes to show that this isn't possible. Now, this is a very modest form of conceptual innovation I've been concerned with showing isn't possible here. Modest theoretically, but of course immensely important in terms of practice. For it follows from what I have just said that the future of mathematics cannot be predicted, and if the future of mathematics cannot be predicted, then the future of physical science cannot be predicted, and if the future of physical science cannot be predicted, then it follows that the future of technology cannot be predicted either. Quite simply, were we now living in the year 1936, we would be quite unable to predict that within a matter of months, Turing was going to prove the effective computability theorem, as a result of which it would be possible to design computers, as a result of which a great deal of modern technology would be other than what it is, and indeed almost all modern weapons development would be quite other than what it is. It follows that this, as it must seem to some of you, rather arcane point about the impossibility of providing a decision procedure for certain theorems has extremely important social implications. So, the first kind of unpredictability with which I am concerned is that which springs from the impossibility of predicting conceptual innovation. Now I'm concerned with a second kind of unpredictability. This second kind of unpredictability springs from open decisions. I apologize, by the way. I normally have to do this one with a blackboard, and I am like a conjurer who has arrived on the stage without not only a hat, but without a rabbit either. And I will see if we can do this without visual aids, but you must forgive me. The sort of unpredictability that I'm concerned with here is a fairly obvious kind of unpredictability at first. Let us suppose that you are facing a decision. You have to choose between doing A or B. You do not yet know which you wish to choose, and therefore, it seems to follow obviously, you can't predict which you will choose. For indeed, if you knew what you were going to choose, you wouldn't have to choose, and so you wouldn't be going through this agony. From the fact that you are going through this agony of choice, it must follow that you don't know what you are going to choose, and therefore you can't predict your choice. So the prima facie case here is the case that says, in every case in life where somebody faces an open decision, they have an outcome that is unpredictable by them. Well, now I wish to strengthen this initial thesis in a number of ways. First of all, I wish to introduce two restrictions on the class of case to which it applies. And I do this out of pure intellectual cowardice. Mr. David Pears, in his paper on predicting and deciding, has introduced a tangle of difficulties into this matter, and instead of meeting them head-on as I would if I were smart enough, I am going to sidestep them by introducing restrictions so that his arguments just do not touch my case. This is a standard intellectual method, which many of you will have used yourselves, I'm sure. The first thing that I want to do is as follows. Pears points out that there may well be a case where I have an open decision, but in some sense the outcome can be predicted by me, even though I don't know what I am going to do. Now, how is this possible? Well, consider the example he offers. I am playing chess, and I reach a point in the end game where I have to move in a particular position, either my bishop or my knight, and I don't know which to move. And I sit there trying to decide which to move. Somebody then says to me, "That's very interesting. I was watching your brother play chess yesterday, and I noticed that in the end game he reached exactly the same position as this one." Now, it so happens that through the years I have learnt inductively that whenever my brother and I are playing chess and reach the same position, we always make the same move. I am therefore now able to predict with enormous confidence that I will make whatever move my brother made yesterday, though I do not know what move he made yesterday, and so I do not know which of the two moves I will make. But I may still be able to predict correctly that I will make the move that my brother made yesterday. That is to say, I cannot predict which move I will make under the description that specifies the two relevant alternatives, but I can make the prediction under some other description. So in order to meet this class of case, I now say that I am going to ascribe unpredictability not to decisions between alternatives as such which remain open, but only to that class of open decisions where no description of the alternatives is available to me of a predictable kind other than those descriptions which specify the two alternatives. I put out of court cases where a description is made available to me that doesn't specify one of the alternatives. And that gets rid of that problem for the moment. It gets rid of it permanently if you don't care. Now I want to introduce a second restriction in order to meet another argument of Pears. Pears, in some very subtle and interesting arguments, considers the question of whether a man may ever be said to know completely his own beliefs and desires, and thus be able to predict his own decisions because he has a total knowledge of his beliefs and desires. Now, I don't want to enter into this difficult case. I want instead to restrict my arguments to the case where the only evidence that a man has as to the relative strength of his desires for two alternatives is the outcome. And there are many such cases. There are many cases where I want to do A and I want to do B. You say to me, "Well, do whichever one you want most." I say the whole problem is I can't tell which I want most. Later on I say, well, I see I wanted B most. You say, "How do you know now?" I say, "I chose to do B." And that's the only evidence I have. So I restrict myself to those open decisions where the only class of descriptions that are relevant to prediction are those that specify the alternatives. The decision remains open. And where, secondly, it's the case that I have no way of weighing my alternative desires other than examining which choice I in fact make. Now, you may say, this has been a great labour for a very trivial result. For all you have so far managed to show is that there is a class of cases in the world, and clearly there is such a class of cases and quite a large one, where undecidability by A entails unpredictability by A. If Jones cannot decide whether he is going to marry Hester or Henrietta, I mean, assuming that both ladies are equally willing, if he cannot decide whether he is going to marry Hester or Henrietta, then he cannot predict whether he is going to marry Hester or Henrietta. But you may say, the fact that Jones doesn't know whether he's going to marry Hester or Henrietta doesn't mean that whether he's going to marry Hester or Henrietta is unpredictable. It merely means it's unpredictable by Jones. Let us suppose that there is some observer who has formulated laws about the marital preferences of red-haired bohemians aged 35 with a lisp, or whatever class Jones falls into. And let us suppose, as it were, that Daniel Bell or God is watching the scene, and whereas poor old Jones can't tell whether he is going to marry Hester or Henrietta, and so can't make up his mind and so can't predict, Daniel Bell or God is able to predict perfectly well. Now, what I want to show is, let us now consider. Let us take our imaginary observer, and let us consider that he too faces a number of open alternatives. He too confronts choices. And just as Jones can't decide whether he is going to do A or B, but our hypothetical observer, let us say Smith, can predict Jones' behaviour, so there will be certain alternatives open to Smith, and Smith will be unable to predict Smith's behaviour. So the objector says, Smith can predict Jones' behaviour, though Jones can't predict Jones' future behaviour, and Smith can predict Jones' behaviour, but Smith can't predict Smith's behaviour. But now let us consider, Smith can't predict Smith's behaviour. So one of the things Smith can't predict is the outcome of his future decisions. But if he can't predict the outcome of his future decisions, one of the things he can't predict is whether he will ever impact on Jones. Now, if he can't predict whether he will ever impact on Jones, he cannot predict what Jones's future choices will be. Here is Smith busy considering whether Jones is going to marry Hester or Henrietta. But Smith cannot predict whether he is not going to decide to run off with Hester or Henrietta himself. And for this reason, he cannot predict the outcomes of Jones's future decisions either. That is to say, a given agent's actions being unpredictable to him, the extent to which he will interfere with somebody else's actions must be unpredictable to him, but in that case, the unpredictability of other agents to him ranges as widely as the unpredictability of his own actions. For what choices we have in the world and what their outcomes are depends on how far other people impact upon us. Now, one response to this is to say, but surely we can just take a strong hold on ourselves. If one wishes to be a social scientist, one simply makes a resolution not to interfere with those subjects about whom one is observing and about whom one wishes to frame prediction. All one can say is one has watched other people make moral resolutions, and they have failed too. And if the strength of sociological prediction is of the same order as the strength of sociologists' moral intentions, then the subject is very different from physics, also much more fragile. So the second kind, it turns out that unpredictability by the agent of his own decisions does provide a premise from which we can derive the result of unpredictability by the agent of the decisions of anyone with whom he may interact, and since he can't predict with whom he may interact, the unpredictability of anyone at all. So we have a second sort of unpredictability. Third sort of unpredictability. This third sort of unpredictability is most illuminatingly phrased in game theoretic terms. Let us suppose that we are in a newly liberated third world state. There are a whole lot of people jockeying for positions of power. There are the politicians of the various parties, the government to whom the ex-colonial power handed over political power, and the opposition parties of various brands. There are the trade union leaders. There are the military. there is the Marxist-Leninist Revolutionary Party of East, wherever it is. All these people are sitting around watching the others. They have all read a stock of books which include such works as Lenin on State and Revolution, Lipsitz Political Man, and all this sort of stuff. Every one of them wishes to know what the others are going to do. But in predicting what the others are going to do, they have to face the fact that a major component in the decision that the others make as to what they're going to do is the decision of the others, is the prediction of the others as to what they are going to do. So they are essentially engaged in predicting what the others will predict, that they are predicting about what the others will predict about, etc. That is to say, they are involved in a prediction which does not involve an infinite regress, but an indefinite one. Now, the important thing to see here is, that in this particular game theoretic situation, given imperfect information, there are many situations in which there is no uniquely rational solution for any of the players, and which all the players know that there is no uniquely rational solution for any of the players. And in this situation, the actions of each player become unpredictable to the others. This is exemplified in the recent politics of Uganda, where the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and the President were each planning to arrest each other. And in the end, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces arrested the President on a Friday, the President having planned to arrest him on a Monday. Originally, the Commander-in-Chief had been going to arrest the President on the Tuesday, but he then put his date forward to the Friday and so won. Each of them had been putting the dates forward for some time, according to just this pattern. And in this kind of game, there is no way to predict the outcomes for the player, and it follows there is no way to predict the outcomes for the observer, for there is no information for the observer to have which will put him in a better position to make a bet than the predictor. That is to say, third world governments shouldn't add to their burdens by employing political experts, because they will not score any better at these games. Now, I've picked out three types of unpredictability. The unpredictability that derives from conceptual innovation, the unpredictability that derives from the openness of decisions under certain circumstances, and the unpredictability that arises from the character of certain kinds of game theoretic conflict situations. It's extremely important to see the part that all these play in the lives of social particulars. Social particulars, I have already suggested, remember what I said about social particulars, they are particular: hospitals, armies, factories, trade unions, political parties, universities, whatever you like. Social particulars are constituted by the beliefs about them and the concepts of them which those who participate in them possess. But precisely because they are conceptually constituted, innovations in concepts are part of their life. That is to say, the history of the concept of political party and the history of political parties are simply two sides of one and the same history. And the arguments within the British Conservative Party, for instance, as to whether the British Conservative Party is essentially a paternalist aristocratic party, or whether it is which embraces the whole nation in a hierarchical structure, or whether it is essentially the party of the businessman, Disraeli versus Joseph Chamberlain, is both a debate about the concept of a party and a debate which actually has informed and moved forward the life of the British Conservative Party. Now, if this is so, if parties and other social particulars are in essential part constituted by the concepts of them, which the agents who participate in them possess, then it is quite clear that they are subject to conceptual innovation. But conceptual innovation is unpredictable. It follows that the future history of social particulars is unpredictable. And as with conceptual innovation, so also with decisions and game theoretic situations. The histories of social particulars are histories of open decision-making and histories of game theoretic type conflicts of the sort that I have described. And it follows that the identity of social particulars has nothing whatsoever to do with regularities of the kind that constitute the identity of natural particulars. What makes a given political party the same party that it was 100 years ago is in fact a continuous historical tradition. It is the installation of a particular kind of transmission of memory. It is purely historical. What makes a nitrogen atom the same nitrogen atom that it was 100 years ago is the continuous identity in the exhibition of the same kind of regularities through space and time at continuous points in space and time. And this is quite different from a social particular. not only does it follow that the identity of social particulars is historical, whereas the identity of natural particulars belongs to their predictability, it follows also that there can be no laws governing the behaviour of social particulars. For social particulars do not exhibit in their lives the kind of regularities for which we can formulate clear and relevant prima facie counterexamples. Every prima facie counterexample and its citation belong actually to the life of the social particular in question, and we have no means of discriminating genuine counterexamples from merely prima facie counterexamples of the kind available to us objectively and impersonally in the realm of nature. It follows that, in any strict sense of science, there is no social science. From all this taken together, it follows that the regularities that we do discover in social life may be genuine, are indeed genuine, but are not law-like. That is to say, it is no part of my case to assert that there are not genuine regularities of many kinds in social life. But these regularities are de facto the generalizations in terms of which we formulate them and understand them are not law-like in this sense that we do not know their precise scope, and we cannot derive from such generalizations genuine, well-defined sets of counterfactual conditionals. We never know when these generalizations will not let us down. Given, then, that we identify a regularity, and given that we never know when our identification may not fail us, we are never justified in extrapolating from trends in the social world in the way that we may be justified in extrapolating from trends in the natural world. And this, let me point out, is just as well. Had we been justified in extrapolating from the trends identified by demographers, we should have predicted at various occasions in the last 40 years both a world that was already so populated that there wasn't enough to eat or enough air to breathe, and also a world so empty that we wouldn't be quite clear what to do. Exponential curves, the curves that map most trends, always flatten out. The problem is you never know when they're going to flatten out. I mean, for example, had the rate of increase in the number of women telephone operators between the years 1935 to 1940 in the United States continued indefinitely, there would by now be no woman in the United States who was not a telephone operator. Clearly this wasn't going to happen. Nobody could say when the curve would level out. An even more impressive one is, if the rate of increase in the publication of scientific periodicals that existed in the years 1960 to 62 had continued indefinitely, by the year 2000, the total mass of scientific periodicals would have been greater than that of the Earth. You will be glad to hear that this rate of increase was not maintained either. But that's to say, the identification of a trend is always merely the mapping of a curve so far. And from this it follows that fallacies are embodied in certain types of argument from what is often rather laughably called computer simulation. That is to say, there is now among social scientists the practice of taking a given phenomenon, trying to discover some kind of regularity, and then arguing that in identifying the regularity, you have identified an instrument for prediction. There are, for instance, a number of papers on the pre-World War I naval race between Germany and Great Britain. And it has been shown that there are equations which will enable one to map the changes in the respective strengths, naval strengths of Germany and Great Britain in the years, indeed not just from 1900 to 1914, but from way back into the 19th century to 1914. Now, the most interesting thing about these mappings is, first of all, that it was originally discovered that the relevant line on the graphs could be mapped in terms of a simultaneous equation, and then somebody discovered that you would get the same line by a differential equation, and the differential equation was even better because it reflected notions of rates of increase and so on. The thing that the people who've written these papers don't seem to recognize is that the particular line that they have drawn on the graphs to represent this arms race is a line that can be represented on that graph by an infinite set of equations. For it is a formal truth that through any finite set of lines, any finite set of points, an infinite set of lines pass. And for each of these lines there is an equation. Now, what is the implication of this formal truth? It is that somebody who has identified, in these rather precise terms, a regularity, has no grounds thereby for believing that from then on the line will go on in the same way. And indeed, in the whole set of papers, which culminate in Mitchell and Milstein's paper on the pre-World War I naval race, one of the things that all the commentators omit to point out is that the line always ends in 1914. But there is nothing in the mapping of the line that would have led one to predict this. That is to say, the fraud in computer simulation derives from the same formal truth I have already pointed out, namely that through any finite set of points an infinite set of lines pass. That is, in picking out for any finite set of human occurrences a regularity, which you can then program into a computer so that you can repeat the occurrences, you are not justified in inferring that the way that the computer goes on represents the way events would have gone on. For there will indeed be, in principle, an infinite set of ways that this line could go on. Let me give you one very beautiful example. One of the great aids to living rational human life is playing war games. And you're probably all familiar with the kind of war games that you can buy in cardboard boxes. I recommend to you, well, not to play as a war game, because it's an eccentric case, as you'll discover presently, the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, the point about the Gettysburg war game is that, like most war games, provided that you have the sophistication of a child of 4, you will discover very soon there is a way of playing the game in which you cannot but get the actual historical outcome. The game is so rigged that the historical outcomes. And in the case of most war games, this is very clear. Wellington always wins at Waterloo, and the Germans are always stopped on the Marne, and so on. I mean, if you want to reverse these things, you have to play with children of 3. Except for Gettysburg. If you obey the rules in the Gettysburg game, the South always wins. Now, it is a matter of history that this didn't actually happen. Why not? I don't want diverted onto military history. I become nauseatingly boring, and I will therefore not give you my account of the Battle of Gettysburg in detail, which is quite important for this business of prediction. There are 2 reasons. One relates to particular circumstances at one point in the battle. I'll ignore those. The other is the fact there was one flaw in the actual fighting of the Battle of Gettysburg. They didn't know that that was the war game they were playing. That is to say, the war game is determinate in a way in which the battle was not. Only certain pieces, only certain places are included on the board. And there is an initial delimitation of what is going to happen, such as is never there in actual life. That is to say, on actual terrains, and what is true of battles is also true of diplomatic negotiations, making love, holding seminars, and doing all the other things that make up life, on all these terrains, situations are always determinate after the event, but never before. Before the event, it is impossible to say what the parameters which delimit the event are going to be. And that is to say, there isn't something called the Battle of Gettysburg which is about to be fought. There is only the Battle of Gettysburg after it has been fought. And this is a truth ignored by people who believe in predictability of human affairs. I have already said that I am not interested in arguing, I would be foolish to be interested in arguing, against the notion that there are large-scale and identifiable regularities in human life. But I must now point out one feature of these, and not only the feature that I so far pointed out, namely they cannot be depended on. It is the case with nature that to increase our knowledge of the regularities of nature always increases our ability to predict. And this is not so with human life. And the reason why it is not so with human life is as follows. There are certain practices which are at the core of human life. I mean lying, irony, dissimulation, pretending, silence, concealment. These practices are at the core of human life because were they not, were we continually manifest to other people, we should be unable to preserve ourselves from them in very important ways. It is very important to continuing human life as it is that in fact these practices should be available to us, and human life is riddled with them. Now, whenever a regularity is discovered in human life, it is available at once to those who wish to disappoint the expectations of others. Every discovery of a regularity is the discovery of a new occasion for circumventing the predictions of others. Consider, for example, the famous case of the pig cycle. The pig cycle dominated certain sectors of British agricultural economy between 1919 and 1939. What happened was roughly this. A whole lot of people, initially ex-servicemen, would look around and they would discover that companies that made bacon, sausages and the like, pig products, were willing to pay quite high prices for pigs. On the other hand, pigs are fed on swill, on potato peelings, on garbage that gets thrown away. The food for pigs costs practically nothing. The prices offered for pigs are quite high. So a whole lot of people say there's money to be made in pigs, and they go into pig farming. Having gone into pig farming, the supply of pigs increases, and the demand for pig food rises. As the demand for pig swill rises, people say, why should we give this swill away? And they start charging for it, and the price of pig food goes up. Equally, the supply of pigs grows, and since the supply of pigs grows, the price offered by the people who need pigs, the manufacturers of bacon and sausages, falls. And the profit margin in pigs decreases, until finally people say there's no money to be had in pigs anymore. And so they all get out of pig farming. And as they get out of pig farming, the demand for pig food drops, and the supply of pigs drops. And the price given by the manufacturers of pig products for pigs rises, and the price asked for garbage, swill, potato peelings falls. Till suddenly a whole lot of new people say, gosh, they say, there's money to be made in pig farming. And they all go back into pig farming and start all over again. Now, this cycle went on for seven-year cycles between 1919 and 1939. During the war, Eli Devons, great economist now dead, was employed, as most British academics were, in various kinds of war jobs. And one of his jobs was going around the countryside talking to people in industry and agriculture about pieces of knowledge from economics which would actually be of practical use. And on one occasion in North Wales, he gave a talk which included a piece about the pig cycle to a group of farmers, and he was very badly heckled by what seemed a rather intelligent man at the back, who kept saying things very loudly like nonsense and obviously false and things like this, and absurd, and quite clearly was influencing the meeting quite a lot. So Evans was slightly put out by this, and later on in the bar he was introduced to the man as the local secretary of the National Farmers Union, and he said, now look, you're an intelligent man, you must have seen that what I was saying about the pig cycle was true. Why did you make all this fuss about it? Oh, said the man, of course it's true, but you didn't have to tell the others, did you? That is to say, those regularities which constitute economic cycles are not such that, given them, anybody can predict what is going to happen, but they are available for exploitation. They are constituted by people's beliefs and lack of beliefs on various subjects. They are alterable by beliefs and lack of beliefs, and insofar as they maintain themselves, far from it being the case that we have to abide by them, we can find plenty of ways of altering them, using them to our advantage, and using them precisely so as to defeat the new expectations that have been built up. Consequently, it is not the case that the discovery of regularities in society is an activity external to society. It is itself an important part of social activity, and the defeat of expectations is itself something that is maximized by discovery as well as expectation. Every new regularity puts us in a new game theoretic situation, opens new decision problems for us. Having argued that there are regularities in human life, but that they are not genuine law-like regularities, that the generalizations which formulate them are not genuine law-like generalizations, and that reflective human intelligence alters their nature, two other problems now fall into place, which are very often treated of, but not given the importance that they deserve, because they have been put forward in the wrong context. The first is the unpredictability of judgment. There are a great many cases in which it is quite clear that some decisions are more rational than others, but it is far from clear, within a given range of decisions, which is the most rational to make. And it's just here that we talk about the exercise of judgment. Judgment is often exercised when one is appointing a new candidate for a job, one is selecting a problem out of a number to work on, one is selecting a policy for a university or a hospital or a school or whatever. Now, it's quite clear that where judgment is concerned, predictability is very limited, just because the exercise of judgment is concerned with, as we say, intangibles. Not only do those who exercise it not know in advance what they're going to do, but we find it very difficult to know what they're going to do too. I'll come back to this point in a moment, because what I have to say about it is essentially the same as what I have to say about the other problem, which is the problem of what I shall call small causes with large effects. The most classic instance of a small cause with a large effect is Cleopatra's nose, as discussed by J.B. Bury. The historian Bury used to ascribe the founding of the Roman Empire to the size of Cleopatra's nose. Had her nose been a millimetre longer or a millimetre shorter, he suggested, she would not have entranced Mark Antony. Had she not entranced Antony, Antony would never have gone into an alliance with her and so broken up the triumvirate. Had he never broken up the triumvirate, the Battle of Actium would never have occurred, and if the Battle of Actium had never have occurred, Augustus would never have ended up as the sole ruler of the entire Roman domain, and so created the Roman Empire. Now, I do not wish to suggest any grounds for conviction about Bury's speculations on Mark Antony's nasal fixation. But there are cases better established. Consider the Battle of Waterloo. During Waterloo, Napoleon had a cold. As a result of having a cold, he entrusted some of the major decisions in the battle to Ney. During the battle, Ney had 9 horses shot under him. I tended to believe that I myself would not perhaps be as calm and sensible as I otherwise am on such an occasion. Now, it's quite clear that factors like Napoleon's cold and the horses being shot under Ney have a decisive effect on battles. Had Napoleon and Ney been calm, they would have sent in the Garde Impériale at 2 in the afternoon, and they would almost certainly have broken the British lines. In fact, they waited till 4, and they lost the battle. Now, very often, when people deal with factors like the unpredictability of judgment or the large effects of small factors, they suggest that if only we knew enough more about the relevant causal chains, if only we knew enough more about the circumstances, we should be able to weight what seemed to us imponderable factors involved, and so we should be able to indulge in rational prediction. But if my previous arguments are right, there is no context of the relevant kind to set these factors in. There is no question of assigning a relative weight to these factors as against other factors, because we don't have any causal generalizations for this subject matter anyway. And if we have no causal generalizations for this subject matter anyway, then somebody's getting a cold, somebody having a horse shot under him, somebody's nose being of a particular length to entrance somebody else, these are factors, the effects of which are going to be, in a quite literal sense, incalculable. This terminates my theoretical argument, but it's very important that it's an argument with practical consequences. One can put the practical consequences in 2 ways. First, as follows. If I'm right, the true patron of the human sciences, or at least of the social sciences, ought to be taken to be Machiavelli rather than Hobbes. For Hobbes is essentially the father of the tradition, according to which the task of the social scientist is to formulate laws which will allow us in the end, if only we know enough, to predict revolutions in the way that we predict eclipses. It will be a disgrace for social and political science when this utopia has occurred for a revolution to go unpredicted, just as it would be a disgrace to astronomy if an eclipse went unpredicted. And this is quite a different attitude from that of Machiavelli. For Machiavelli held that the inductively founded maxims, which we derive from our study of past human affairs, never exhaust the possibilities. He puts this by saying, roughly speaking, that the bitch goddess Fortuna has never been overthrown. There always is Fortuna, there always is the incalculable at the heart of human affairs. In fact, Machiavelli actually thinks that he can weight things so that we can tell how much influence Fortuna has on human affairs, though this is actually incompatible with belief in Fortuna. I mean, the trouble with that girl is you don't know how much influence she has. And it follows from this that the end of social science is never a complete set of laws. It is always a list of maxims which are known to be such that they may go wrong. It is always a list of maxims, of which the final one is, and always remember, things may go quite differently on the day. Secondly, it also follows from this that there is no form of expertise which will exempt anybody from the condition of the ordinary political agent. That is to say, there is no form of knowledge which will put certain people into a fundamentally different condition in relation to the knowledge of politics from the condition which we all are in now. Experts there may be in the sense that there are some people who have looked at the past longer, who have looked at it more intelligently, who have come to grips with the sort of limited generalizations that we have, who have more flair for that kind of thing. I mean, that's the same in all human activities. But just as there are no experts in politics any more than there are experts in swimming, so to speak. You can do politics better or worse, but you can't be an expert at it. And it follows from this that not only is it superstitious and mythological to believe in a predictable and prefabricated future, but it is superstitious and mythological to believe that one can get a hold on that future by hiring professors of political science or of other social sciences as experts. The expert doesn't exist in this field. And that, of course, is a truth with extremely important implications, a truth likely to be perhaps less welcome in this city than almost anywhere else in the world. Suppose that somebody were to say to you, but that can't be true. After all, look how highly paid they are. There must be something in it. The rejoinder ought to be this, that there is one way of testing the power of prediction which is quite independent of any argument that I have adduced. And this is a test which I would quite willingly allow my whole case to stand or fall on. The claim to be able to do anything at all can be vindicated in one absolute way, by doing it. And if indeed it is the case that my arguments against predictability do not hold, then the final way of showing that predictability is indeed possible in human affairs would be to show that the ability can be exercised by exercising it. Now, there are areas in which claims to prediction are made where this is fully recognized. One of the few defects of modern American culture is that it has come relatively late to recognize the importance of legalizing off-course betting on horse races. And it is perhaps this that has made American society peculiarly susceptible to claims about predictability from social scientists. The reader of the British or European newspaper is very used to the racing correspondent, who predicts the winners of horse races regularly, and whose performances in prediction can be matched against the results. It is indeed the fact that every British racing correspondent has his record tabulated, and you can compare different racing correspondents and see who can actually predict which horses are going to win races and which can't. And all questions of an abstract philosophical kind about the predictability of horse racing stand or fall against the fact that there are certain racing correspondents who are very good at predicting winners, and there are others who are very bad. I may say in an aside that the British Communist daily paper has the best record of any newspaper in the British Isles for predicting the outcome of horse races, and this is perhaps compensation for its inability to predict political events, which is equally marked. But from this point of view, now, my suggestion is that claims by professors of political science ought to be treated at least as seriously as the claims of racing correspondents. That is to say, if there are people who tell us that prediction is possible, let them show us the notebooks in which they have kept scores. And let us recognize at this point that they must keep the score in the cases where they fail as well as they succeed. Moreover, they must be able to show us something else. Given a purely random distribution of predictions, predictors, and outcomes, it will be the case, given the shape of a curve of normal distribution, that a certain number of predictors will predict consistently successfully on a purely random basis. I mean, there will be a few people at one end of the curve who will always be successful, just given a random distribution, and a few people at the other end of the curve who will never be successful, given a purely random distribution. We must therefore be shown that the number of successful predictors in the population of political scientists is higher than we would be given on a purely random distribution. Now, it's very interesting that no social scientist ever faces the test of statistics as applied to himself rather than to the subject matter he studies. That in this particular, that none of this is ever done. Indeed, what is notable about social scientists is they don't ever look back. In the year 1958, Herman Kahn predicted 10 specific developments in weapons development within the next 10 years. None occurred. I don't believe that one should be particularly critical of Kahn here. It appears to me that at this point he is representative. But given this, well, it's clear that when people write books with titles like Towards the Year 2000 or books on prediction, we are in the presence not of science but of mythology. How you feel about mythology is a matter, perhaps, of your ideological stance towards the world rather than your rationality. But insofar as it is the business of philosophy to try and destroy superstitious myth, it is the business of philosophy to show that, in fact, the future cannot be predicted in the way that is implied by a great deal of modern social science.